Have you ever wondered what really happens to the men trapped inside a T-72 when its armor fails? It isn't pretty. In fact, crews call it the jack-in-the-box effect, because when that ammo carousel ignites, the turret doesn't just pop off, it launches sky high, and the men inside rarely stand a chance. But the truth goes deeper than exploding turrets. For 50 years, these tanks have rolled into wars from the Middle East to Ukraine, leaving behind a trail of burned steel and broken lives. Tonight, we're exposing the dark truth about the T-72 and the horrors its crews endure. Stories you were never meant to hear. Stay with me. When the T-72 was conceived in the late 1960s, it wasn't designed with the men inside in mind. It was designed with numbers in mind. The Soviet Union had studied the lessons of World War II with brutal clarity. The Red Army's victory over Nazi Germany came not because of superior armor or safety, but because of overwhelming force. The legendary T-34 had been produced in the tens of thousands, swarming the battlefield in such numbers that it overwhelmed even Germany's technologically advanced Tigers and Panthers. Soviet planners walked away with a grim conclusion. Mass production, not survivability, wins wars. The T-72 was built on that philosophy. Engineers stripped away the extra manpower of a four-man crew, replacing the human loader with a mechanized autoloader. The result? Only 3 men were needed to fight the tank. Fewer soldiers meant faster training, fewer resources spent on rations and uniforms, and smaller hulls that were harder to hit on the battlefield. But this efficiency came at a deadly price. With the autoloader sitting directly under the crew's feet, those 3 men were trapped inside a pressure cooker of steel and high explosives. Unlike Western tank designers, who gradually moved toward protecting their crews with features like armored ammunition storage and blowout panels, the Soviets accepted the risk. To them, tankers were not irreplaceable specialists. They were expendable assets, as replaceable as the machines they drove. Military historians have described the Soviet doctrine as quantity over quality, a doctrine that considered the tank's battlefield value more important than the men inside it. For the West, the crew was the priority. For the Soviets, the tank was the priority. This chilling calculation shaped everything about the T-72. Fast to build, easy to train, cheap to replace. For the men inside, that meant survival was never the design's main goal. Step inside a T-72 and you immediately feel the claustrophobia. The gunner and commander sit crammed shoulder to shoulder in a turret barely large enough to move, while beneath their feet lies the most dangerous feature of the entire machine, the autoloader carousel. This rotating steel ring holds around 22 shells, each tipped with explosive propellant charges. On paper, it was an engineering marvel. It allowed the T-72 to fire roughly every 7 seconds, regardless of fatigue. It cut down crew size. It made the tank cheaper to build. But to the men who sat on top of it, it was a loaded gun aimed directly upward at their bodies. The autoloader itself had a reputation for being temperamental. In training, soldiers joked grimly about its taste for arms. The mechanism that grabbed and rammed shells into the breech could crush or sever any limb in its path if a crewman moved at the wrong moment. Dozens of gruesome accidents were reported over the years, with loaders' duties transferred to a machine that had no mercy. Once in combat, the risks escalated. If an incoming shell managed to punch through the tank's armor and reach that carousel, the result was not a small fire. It was instant catastrophe. The ammunition would cook off, igniting all at once, and the explosion was often powerful enough to kill the crew before they even realized they'd been hit. Veterans who served in these machines understood the danger every time they climbed inside. Sitting in a T-72 meant surrounding yourself with explosives in a steel box, knowing that if the worst happened, there was no safe compartment, no armored door, no chance of containment. Western crews in Abrams or Leopards might have a chance to survive a catastrophic hit thanks to blowout panels venting explosions upward and away. In a T-72, survival was nearly impossible. The very innovation that gave the tank its efficiency turned the lives of its crews into expendable fuel for the Soviet war machine. The T-72's most infamous flaw has earned a haunting nickname, the Jack-in-the-Box effect. It is perhaps the most graphic symbol of what happens when crew safety is sacrificed for efficiency. When the ammunition carousel detonates, the overpressure inside the turret builds faster than the steel can contain it. With nowhere else to go, the pressure blows out the weakest point, the turret ring. What follows is a sight that has been captured on countless battlefields, from Grozny in the 1990s to Ukraine today. The turret, weighing several tons, is launched into the air as if propelled by a rocket. It lands meters away, sometimes upside down, sometimes yards from the burning hull. For the men inside, there is no survival. The explosion doesn't give them seconds, it gives them milliseconds. This horrifying effect is not just theory. During the First Chechen War, Russian crews advancing into Grozny watched in horror as one T-72 after another erupted in fireballs, their turrets catapulting skyward. Survivors described seeing fellow tankers vanish instantly, incinerated by the overpressure before they could even scream. In Iraq, U.S. tankers reported destroying Iraqi T-72s with single shots, watching as turrets flew into the desert night. And in Ukraine, modern drone footage shows this effect again and again, turning the Jack-in-the-Box from whispered rumor into a viral image of modern armored warfare. Military analysts are blunt about what it means. If a T-72 is penetrated at the turret, the crew is finished. Western analysts note that blowout panels in NATO tanks often save lives, even when the vehicle is destroyed. But in the T-72, the crew is part of the explosion. For viewers, these images are shocking, even mesmerizing. For the men ordered to climb into these tanks, it is a silent fear that never leaves them. The knowledge that one lucky strike from an enemy RPG or missile could turn them into nothing more than ashes inside a steel coffin. When the First Chechen War erupted in 1994, Russian commanders rolled their armored divisions into Grozny, expecting a swift victory. Columns of T-72s and T-80s were sent parading into the capital as if the sheer sight of tanks would force the rebels to surrender. What they found instead was a nightmare, tailor-made to exploit every weakness of Soviet tank design. Chechen fighters didn't meet the tanks head-on. Instead, they waited in ruined buildings, on rooftops, and in hidden basements. They allowed the lead columns to snake their way deep into the city, then sprung their trap. RPG teams fired from every angle, rear, flanks, and above, picking off the first and last tanks to trap the rest. Suddenly, dozens of T-72s were boxed into narrow streets with no room to maneuver, no way to retreat, and no infantry cover to clear the ambush sites. It didn't take long for the crews to realize they were fighting a battle they were never trained for. T-72s, with their limited gun depression and elevation, could not aim high enough to hit fighters firing from the third or fourth floors. Nor could they lower their main guns to clear out attackers in basements. Survivors later described the panic of swiveling their turrets back and forth as RPG teams circled them like wolves. For the Chechens, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. And then came the explosions. RPG-7s that slipped through side armor or struck the thin rear plate ignited the ammunition carousel. One by one, turrets erupted skyward in the dreaded Jack-in-the-Box effect. Streets filled with smoke and flames as burning hulks blocked escape routes. Soldiers trapped inside screamed over radios for support that never came. By the end of a single day, dozens of tanks were destroyed, their turrets scattered across Grozny like tombstones. Survivors called it the tank cemetery. For the crews, Grozny was hell on earth. Many burned alive, trapped in their steel coffins. Others tried to claw their way out, only to be cut down by machine gun fire as they emerged. It was a battle that exposed the T-72's deadliest flaws in the most brutal way possible. In close-quarters urban warfare, the tank was not a weapon of invincibility, but a rolling death trap. While Grozny showed how vulnerable T-72s were in urban ambushes, the Gulf War of 1991 revealed their weaknesses on the open battlefield. battlefield. Saddam Hussein's Iraq fielded hundreds of T-72s, many of them downgraded export models. They were dug into defensive positions across the desert, waiting to face off against the American Abrams and British Challengers. On paper, the Iraqis seemed prepared. They had numbers, fortified positions, and favorable terrain. But what unfolded was nothing less than an armored massacre. The U.S. M1A1 Abrams tanks entered the fight equipped with cutting-edge thermal sights, advanced fire control computers, and depleted uranium ammunition. Iraqi T-72 crews, by contrast, peered through outdated optics that struggled even in daylight. At night, they were effectively blind. In one of the war's most infamous battles, the Battle of 73 Easting, American tank units destroyed entire Iraqi armored brigades without suffering a single loss. Abrams crews reported engaging T-72s at ranges of 2,500 to 3,000 meters, distances at which the Iraqis couldn't even see their enemy. For the Iraqi tankers, the battle was a nightmare they never stood a chance of escaping. As shells slammed into their armor, many T-72s erupted in fireballs before their crews could react. Those who tried to return fire discovered that their rounds simply bounced off Abrams' armor. Others never got the chance to fire at all. Their tanks hit and destroyed before they could even line up a shot. American soldiers later described the battlefield as littered with burning wrecks and abandoned hulls. One U.S. tank commander recalled seeing turrets blown completely off Iraqi T-72s in the desert night, describing it as watching a volcano erupt under steel. For the men inside, it was even worse. Survivors were almost non-existent. Most Iraqi crews perished in their tanks, victims not just of superior American firepower, but of their own vehicle's fatal design. The autoloader carousel and poor ammo storage once again turned penetrations into instant funerals. Desert Storm shattered the myth of the T-72 as a world-class main battle tank. What had once terrified NATO planners in the Cold War proved to be an outdated machine, hopelessly outmatched by modern Western armor. And for the crews ordered to fight in them, the desert became their graveyard. If Grozny was the T-72's nightmare in the 1990s and Iraq its humiliation in 1991, then Ukraine has become its public execution. For the first time in history, the destruction of T-72s has been broadcast to the world in real time, shared on social media, and analyzed frame by frame. The results are horrifying and impossible to ignore. Modern Ukrainian soldiers armed with javelins, NLAWs, and drones have turned the T-72 into little more than target practice. Drone footage shows missiles striking the thin top armor, detonating ammunition, and sending turrets flying skyward in the now infamous jack-in-the-box effect. On highways and in fields, wrecks of T-72s litter the landscape, their turrets lying dozens of meters away like steel gravestones. For Russian crews, the terror of fighting in these machines has only grown. Soldiers on the ground describe how a single well-placed missile can destroy an entire crew instantly. Survivors rarely emerge. And unlike past wars where such horrors could be hidden, today's footage spreads across the internet within hours. The world has seen, over and over again, exactly what happens to the men trapped inside. Instant incineration, no chance of escape. Even Russian soldiers have admitted, in intercepted calls and testimonies, that they fear the T-72 more than the enemy. Some have confessed to abandoning their tanks rather than climbing inside. Others have described trying to fight from vehicles already patched with makeshift cope cages, welded steel grates meant to stop top attack weapons, but which often make the tanks even more vulnerable. These desperate measures highlight the truth. The T-72 is not just outdated, it is a death trap. For Ukrainian crews operating captured or inherited T-72s, the reality is the same. They brawl at close ranges, often risking everything for just one more exchange of fire before they're targeted by drones or artillery. The T-72's outdated armor cannot survive against modern weapons, and every crew knows it. Unlike Grozny or Iraq, the war in Ukraine has made the T-72's vulnerability a viral image, turning its flaws into a global spectacle. For the men inside, it's not just a battle, it's a daily gamble with death, one they know the odds are stacked against. For the the men inside a T-72, the battlefield isn't just dangerous. It is claustrophobic, suffocating, and terrifying even before the first shot is fired. The commander and gunner sit practically shoulder to shoulder in a turret barely large enough to move, their knees pressed against the breech of the massive 125mm gun. Around them, stacked beneath the floor and tucked into every spare space, are live rounds of ammunition. To call it cramped would be an understatement. To call it safe would be a lie. Veterans often compared climbing inside a T-72 to shutting yourself in a coffin. The steel walls echo every sound, the screech of the tracks, the thud of incoming artillery, and the haunting metallic clang whenever enemy fire strikes the hull. Crews describe the moment of a penetrating hit as unlike anything else: blinding light, deafening noise, and smoke instantly filling the compartment. In those seconds, panic takes over. Gunners fumble to rotate turrets. Commanders shout over broken radios. Drivers slam the gears into reverse, only to crawl backward at 3 miles per hour, hopelessly slow against incoming fire. And then comes the part no one forgets. If the ammunition is struck, there is no time to react. One survivor of an early Chechen battle recalled hearing a strange hiss and seeing a flash before the tank seemed to disintegrate. He was thrown from the driver's hatch by sheer force, the only man to live. His commander and gunner were gone instantly, their remains never recovered from the burning wreck. Other testimonies speak of men losing arms to the autoloader mid-battle, their screams drowned by the roar of gunfire. Inside the steel coffin, even survival can feel like a curse. Those who managed to escape often did so scarred, burned, or half-deafened, carrying not only physical wounds, but the unbearable weight of being the only one left alive. For every story of survival, there are countless more that ended in silence. Crews swallowed whole by the very machines they were ordered to trust. Escaping a T-72 doesn't mean escaping the war. For the rare few who survived a catastrophic hit, the scars run far deeper than shrapnel wounds. Many lived with horrific burns, disfigurements, or missing limbs from the autoloader or the fire that followed an ammo cook-off. But even worse were the invisible scars, the psychological torment of watching fellow crewmen die in the most violent ways imaginable. Survivors describe the sound of a carousel detonation as something that never leaves them. One moment, you're calling out target ranges. The next, the entire world has become fire, steel, and screams. Tankers who crawled free from destroyed vehicles recall being unable to look at the wreckage, knowing their comrades were still inside. Some admitted they would rather have died with their crew than live with the guilt of being the only one to make it out. Medical records from conflicts in Chechnya, Iraq, and most recently Ukraine show high rates of psychological trauma among surviving tank crews. Nightmares of burning turrets, the metallic taste of smoke, and the endless replay of a single moment, the flash before the explosion, haunt them for years. Families of veterans often spoke of men waking up screaming, unable to explain what they saw. Even in modern times, Russian conscripts sent to fight in Ukraine have been recorded on intercepted calls confessing their terror of riding in T-72s. Some admitted to abandoning their tanks altogether, choosing the stigma of desertion over the certainty of death inside. The scars these men carry are not only personal, they reflect a larger truth. When a weapon is designed with numbers in mind rather than lives, the soldiers ordered to use it become casualties long before they ever reach the battlefield. The tragedy of the T-72 is not just in how many crews have died, but in how many survivors have been condemned to live with memories that no human being should ever have to bear. The T-72 was meant to be a symbol of Soviet power, a tank that could be produced by the thousands to dominate the battlefields of the Cold War. In practice, it became something far darker. From the streets of Grozny to the sands of Iraq to the fields of Ukraine, its silhouette has been burned into history not as a symbol of strength, but as a coffin on tracks. For its crews, every mission carried the same unspoken truth. One lucky shot from the enemy could erase them in an instant. The world has seen the evidence. Viral footage of turrets lying dozens of meters away from their hulls. drone clips of tanks burning with no survivors, interviews with trembling men who refuse to climb back inside. These images aren't propaganda, they are reality. The T-72's design, with its autoloader carousel and cramped turret, was a death sentence written into blueprints decades ago. And despite upgrades, despite patches, despite makeshift cope cages welded on top, the truth has not changed. Western tanks are built to protect their crews. The T-72 was built to be cheap, fast, and replaceable. That doctrine, born from the brutal lessons of World War II, continues to kill soldiers to this day. Every destroyed hull scattered across Ukraine or left rusting in Chechnya is not just a machine lost. It is 3 lives extinguished, 3 families shattered, and a grim reminder of how little value was placed on the men inside. This is the dark truth about the T-72 tank crews. They were not just fighting their enemies, they were fighting their own machine, their own doctrine, their own fate. And in the end, the T-72 will be remembered not for its victories, but for the countless crews it consumed, one fireball at a time.